Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We're going to get started picking up where we left off from last time. If you were with us in our last session, you know that the Imam al-Wasiti rahimahullah ta'ala talked about muhasaba and muraqaba. Ending, or where we ended at, was him basically defining that. فَحُكْمُ الْمُحَاسَبَةِ رعاية جوارحه الظاهرة خوفا من الله تعالى وإقامة لحق تقواه وامتثال أمره واجتناب نهيه. Basically, the rule of accountability or muhasaba is to protect one's outward limbs out of fear of Allah exalted be He by fulfilling the rights of piety, fulfilling His commands and avoiding His prohibitions. If you note here, muhasaba has a lot to do with what's happening outside. Okay? He makes this distinction here. Imam al-Wasiti says, وَحُكْمُ الْمُرَاقَبَةِ حِرَاسَةُ بَاطِنِهِ عن أن يجري فيه شيء يكرهه الله تعالى ويسخطه من الأفكار المذمومة والهموم المحرمة والمكروهة فإن الله سبحانه وتعالى مطلع على ذلك عليم به لا تخفى عليه خافية في الأرض ولا في السماء. He says the rule of vigilance or muraqab is to guard one's inner self. Right? So there you see the difference between what's happening on the outside, our outward actions, versus our innermost thoughts, etc. From anything that Allah exalted be He dislikes and detests, such as blameworthy thoughts or forbidden and disliked concerns. Indeed, Allah exalted and glorified is fully aware of such matters and knows them. Nothing is hidden from Him, whether on the earth or in the heavens. So he goes on, and this is where we pick up. فَمَتَّى وَفَّقَ اللَّهُ الْعَبْدَ لتوفية حق الله في الخواطر الظاهرة والخواطر الباطنة فقد أدى حق الاستقامة كما قال تعالى إن الذين قالوا ربنا الله ثم استقاموا فلا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. So whenever Allah grants a servant success in fulfilling His rights over both outward and inward notions, the servant has fulfilled the obligation of uprightness or istiqamah. Keep this word in mind. We're going to circle back to that. As Allah exalted be He said, indeed those who have said, our Lord is Allah, and then remained upright. Here's that word again. In this verse, ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا istiqamah. ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا istiqamatan. Okay? There will be no fear concerning them, nor will they grieve. So here, just a quick overview of this. When the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, is talking about al-khawatir al-zahira, outward notions, he's likely referring to the notions that influence external actions, your speech, your behavior. They are visible in their effects, manifesting through the deeds that you perform, the interactions that you have with others, including what you choose to say, how you choose to act, or the expressions of your emotions, like when you become angry or when you want to be kind and merciful. These are the expressions or the manifestations of those. So the emphasis here is to have control over your actions by guarding your limbs. And we've talked about the 7 limbs previously, the eyes, the ears, the tongue, etc., protecting them from sinful behavior. And this requires muhasaba, accountability, to ensure that the outward deeds are in alignment with the divine commands. And then when he says your inward notions, most likely referring to the internal mental processes, the intentions, the emotions that reside within the heart and the mind that may not manifest themselves outward. They're like private and unseen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the only one aware of what you're holding inside, like sincerity or a lack of sincerity, humility or reverence, having ill intentions behind your actions. Those are things that may not manifest. They're held inward. They are still things that you're responsible for. The emphasis here on this side is on purity of heart. So you should start beginning to see this balance between what's happening outside and what's happening inside. Okay, we have a balance there. We're managing both, not neglecting one or the other, or giving too much emphasis to one while letting go of another. Okay, so the purity of heart, we're talking about avoiding blameworthy traits like envy, arrogance, hypocrisy. And this is where muraqabah, that vigilance, comes in to ensure that the thoughts or these notions, they align with Allah's command. And when both of these are achieved, as he mentions, that is when you reach a station of istiqamah. And the term istiqamah, in the context of the verse that was recited earlier that he mentions, he says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. This verse, in the context of this verse, the word istiqamah, there's several meanings that have been related in the books of tafsir. One of those is to have firm belief in Allah without associating partners. That you believe in Allah alone without partners. You don't worship others besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And another is to remain obedient to Him by adhering to His legislation. This is verse number 13, by the way, of Surah Al-Ahqaf. That's chapter number 46. And it's narrated in regards to this. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, he recited the words of Allah, this very verse. Indeed, what means indeed those who have said our Lord is Allah, and then remained upright. He said they remained steadfast in obedience to Allah and did not evade like the evasiveness of a fox. He stayed upright, steadfast on the straight path, and not coming in and out and sneaking around. So, to further elucidate or to further explain the meaning, one of the greats, Ibn Rajab, in his book Jami' al-Ulum wal-Hikam, this is the compendium of knowledge and wisdom, he said that istiqamah means adhering to the straight path, sirat al-mustaqim. And that's, we get some notion of that from the various sirat al-mustaqim. Mustaqim has come from the same root word, which is the upright religion. You're going to be upright. You're going to be with the station of istiqamah on the sirat al-mustaqim without deviating to the right or to the left. And this encompasses, he says, performing all acts of obedience, both outward and inward. All right, so this plays to the concept that Imam al-Wasiti rahimahullah ta'ala is delivering for us. It encompasses both outward and inward, and abandoning all prohibitions, both outward and inward. In another verse similar to this would be like a verse prior to that. Allah says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا رَبُّنَا اللَّهُ ثُمَّ اسْتَقَامُوا تَتَنَزَّلُ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَلَائِكَةُ أَلَّا تَخَافُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَبَشِّرُوا بِالْجَنَّةِ الَّتِي كُنْتُمْ تُوعَدُونَ. This is Surah Fussilat, chapter 41, verse number 30. What means, surely those who say, our Lord is Allah, and then remain upright, the angels descend upon them saying, do not fear nor grieve, rather rejoice in the good news of paradise which you have been promised. So in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning the reward for those who proclaim faith and then achieve this istiqamah. Okay, so this is no like small achievement. This is a major milestone in the seeker's journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as they get to this point where they have reached the level of istiqamah. They are firm and fixed and upright. فَلَا يَزَالُ الْعَبْدُ, he goes on, في المكابدة حتى تطمئن نفسه وتتعود جوارحه على الاستقامة ويتعود باطنه على حفظ الأدب ورعاية الحرمات في حضرة الحق. He says that the servant continues striving until his self, his nafs, okay, attains tranquility. حتى تطمئن نفسه, this is important here, and his limbs become accustomed to uprightness. وَتَتَعَوَّدَ جَوَارِحُهُ عَلَى اسْتِقَامَةٍ. Okay, there is to make the limbs accustomed to uprightness, and his inner self becomes accustomed to maintaining propriety and protecting sanctities in the presence of al-haq, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the author is highlighting here for us in these few words the necessity of continual striving. Al-mukabada is to continuously strive until one's nafs becomes subdued. You have to subdue the nafs. It has to surrender. And the limbs, they have to be trained in Allah's obedience. They have to be trained to adhere to Allah's commands, meaning you have to impose things on yourself. Okay? Al-ilmu bit-ta'allum wal-hilmu bit-tahallum. Okay? Knowledge is by acquisition. You don't just drink and all the knowledge you can't learn by osmosis in Islam, Habibi. That's not how it works. Just take all the Quran and papers and sleep on it at night. You got to actually crack the book, and you got to put in the effort, and you got to put in years and years of study and diligence and memorization and revision and research, etc., in order to obtain something. The same thing goes for hilm, which is like forbearance. You can't just excuse yourself by saying, I'm just ill-tempered, I'm just impatient, I'm just hot-headed, I'm just excusing yourself from actually putting in the work by enforcing and imposing better behavior on yourself, or I just like these things, and you're just loose. You don't control, you don't try, there's no effort. In other parts of life, you exert effort, and you work hard, and you strive, and you push yourself, and you challenge, and you sprint and race after things. The same thing goes for your spiritual growth and development. It's something that you have to put in a great deal of effort if you want to achieve success. If you want to get to a point of istiqamah, these things that we're talking about, there has to be a tremendous amount of effort that goes into that. Okay, so that's where we are going to وَتَتَعَوَّدَ جَوَارِحُهُ. You're going to make yourself accustomed to these things. And how do you get accustomed to that? How do you get accustomed to it? By repetition, by doing it, by being consistent. That's how you're going to get accustomed to these things. By developing a habit of these things, you become accustomed to them. And then they have an impact. They begin to have an impact, not only outwardly, as he mentions here, but also inwardly. So these things have to be taken into consideration. He goes on and he says, متى اطمأنت النفس والقلب على ذلك وتعود العبد الاستقامة وأدمن خشية الله بالغيب كما قال تعالى إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير. فهناك يكون قد طهر الظاهر من جميع المكاره وطهر الباطن وهو القلب الذي هو بيت الرب عن جميع ما لا يحبه الله ويكرهه. So when the nafs and the heart become tranquil in this manner, and the servant becomes accustomed to uprightness, they become accustomed to istiqamah, and constantly maintains the reverential fear of Allah unseen, as Allah exalted be He has said. He mentions a verse here from the Quran, what means indeed those who have reverential fear of their Lord unseen, for them is forgiveness and ajrun kabir, great reward, a great reward for all of that. At this point, the outward self has been purified of all dislike traits, and the inward self, namely the heart, which is the Lord's house, وَهُوَ بَيْتُ الرَّبِّ, has been cleansed of everything that Allah does not love and detests. He does not love and He detests it. So the author here in this passage emphasizes the transformative journey of the servant who is persistently striving in devotion and discipline. This is key. Devotion, discipline. Until the inward and the outward realities, they are purified. The key stages here involve the attainment of tranquility of the nafs, habitual adherence to uprightness, that's number 2, and the cultivation of reverence for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, both inwardly and outwardly. The inward notions and the outward actions reflect your reverential fear of Allah. It should be like a mirror of sorts. Okay, so when the nafs is tamed, it transitions to a state described in the Quran as an-nafs al-mutma'inna, which is the tranquil nafs. Because in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the nafs in various ways. One of those is an-nafs ammara bisu, the nafs that orders with evil. That's the untamed, uncontrolled nafs, inclined towards its fulfillment of desires, easily manipulated by shaitan, tempted by worldly pleasures and finite enjoyment. And then when that nafs has an awakening, which we've talked about from the very beginning, there's nafs lawama. It's the reproaching nafs, where it's blameworthy nafs. Begins to, now there's a level of blameworthy and reproach. And then finally, once we begin to train, we begin to work out, we begin to become strong spiritually, it becomes tamed, and it is an-nafs al-mutma'inna. It becomes tranquil, at peace. And this is mentioned in Surah Al-Fajr. Many of you have memorized this particular chapter and are well familiar with the verse. Ya ayyatuha an-nafsul mutma'inna. O tranquil nafs, irji'i ila rabbika radiyatan mardiyya. Right? Rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya. Right, return to your Lord well pleased and pleasing to him. Again, Surah Al-Fajr, this is verse number 27 and verse number 28. So here, this is coupled with the servant becoming accustomed to Istaqamah and developing a constant state of khashya, having reverential fear, even when unseen. Of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unseen. So maintaining a reverence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala while he is unseen is one thing. And then doing that while you yourself are unseen, meaning in your private life. It's not just something that is a part of your public life. You come into the masjid, you put your best foot forward. That's certainly expected because of the scene that you're in. You're in a setting, in a scenario which encourages that, it supports that, it expects that from you, but it doesn't mean when you walk out the doors, you leave all that behind. This is like a training, camp, if you will. When you come into the masjid, it shows you who you can be, the potential that you have when you come in here and you act your best, you dress your best in appropriate clothing, etc. You get to see, look, I could be like this. This is who I can be. I'm praying, I'm saying salam, I'm making du'ats, I'm remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't mean we throw these things off as we walk out the door. And the process results in the purification of both outward actions as well as the heart. The heart being the seat of spiritual connection and described by Imam al-Wasiti as being the Lord's house. And Imam al-Wasiti, the type of scholar that he is, he's not just coming up with these things, but there's all some reference to revelation or the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ. And there are narrations with this exact wording, that al-qalb bayt al-rabb. Right? These are narrations related to the Prophet ﷺ. And some of them, the authenticity of their narration, it could be debated. There are, however, narrations that are authentic and have the same meaning. One of those is inna lillahi aniyatan min ahli al-ard wa aniyatu rabbikum qulubu ibadihi as-salihin wa ahabbuha ilayhi alyanuha wa araquha. Indeed, Allah has vessels among the people of the earth, and the vessels of your Lord are the hearts of his righteous servants. The most beloved of him, the most beloved of them to him are the softest and the most tender of hearts. And that house and that vessel must be free of impurities. If you think about it like that, al-qalb bayt al-rabb, what kind of house do you want for your Lord? What kind of vessel do you reserve for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? One that's foul and odorous, filled with disease? Or do you want one that reflects your love and reverence for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's pure, clean? So by cleansing the outward from disliked traits and the heart from anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala dislikes, the servant reaches a state of readiness for divine acceptance and proximity. So Imam al-Wasiti goes on and he says, وَمَتَى طَهَّرَ الظَّاهِرَ وَالْبَاطِنَ اسْتَعَدَّ الْقَلْبُ لِلْفَيْضِ لأن صاحبه قد كنسه وطهره من المزابل والرذائل وعن الأخلاق السيئة مثل حب المشيخة والرئاسة وحب قبول الخلق واستتباعهم له، ونفى عن القلب حب أن يصير له شهرة بين الخلق في الكرامات والآيات الظاهرة، ومن الكبر فلا يتكبر على مخلوق مثله، والحسد والرياء فلا يرائي بعمله مخلوقا غير الله، بل يستعمل الإخلاص لله ولا يشرك بعبادة ربه أحدا، ولا يحسد أحدا على ما آتاه الله من فضله، ولا يعجب بعمله، بل يرى نفسه مقصرا حقيرا عاجزا عن أداء ما أمر الله تعالى به، ويحب لجميع المسلمين ما يحبه لنفسه ويتواضع لهم فلا يرى نفسه خيرا من مخلوق. Okay, so big time. There's a lot here, and for the sake of time, I'm not going to stop at every single point. But the main thing you need to understand is, as he says, when he purifies the outward and inward, and we've talked about this now a great deal, the heart becomes ready to receive divine outpourings, al-fayd, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that shortly. He says, its owner has swept it clean, the heart, removing filth, vices, and blameworthy traits. And then he begins to highlight what the example of that is, such as love of leadership and authority, the desire for, and we've talked about these things in the past extensively, especially looking at, Manhaj al-Qasidin, Ibn al-Jawzi's Mukhtasar by Abdurrahman ibn Qudama. We've looked at these things one point at a time. Okay, so some of it may hopefully bring up some memories here. So what that is love of leadership and authority, the desire for people's approval and their allegiance, and the yearning for fame among creation through wonders and visible signs, karamat and ayat. These are things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may bestow upon somebody righteous. And the righteous, we might say the wali or the saint, a part of their pure character is that they don't want to divulge these things and have people know them by these things. For if they did that, it would mean or indicate there's some corruption happening. Okay, so a pure heart doesn't want to be recognized by any special gifts that Allah has bestowed upon them. He also eliminates arrogance, so he does not see himself as superior to any other creature like him. Envy, so he does not begrudge others for what Allah has bestowed upon them of his bounty. And ostentation, so he does not perform his deeds for anyone other than Allah. Instead, he practices sincerity for Allah alone, associating none with him in worship. He's not impressed by his own deeds. He doesn't view himself to be spiritually or religiously superior, but views himself as deficient, insignificant, and incapable of fully fulfilling what Allah exalted as He has commanded. He loves for all Muslims what he loves for himself, humbles himself before them, and does not see himself as better than any other creature. This is absolutely essential. This is absolutely essential here. This behavior is very important to the purification of one's nafs, right? You don't view yourself as being superior to other Muslims, like nahnu ala al-haq. You know, we're on this truth, walking around with this attitude of superiority, when it's very likely the reality is it's jahl murakkab. It's nothing but compound ignorance. Right? To walk around with this attitude of arrogance, spiritual, religious, it's probably worse than dunyawi arrogance, right? I'm a this, I'm a that. I've accomplished these things. I have all these degrees in education, and I have these titles and this salary. And you get to develop. That's one thing. Okay, that has to do with the world. Oh, at the end of the day, on that. But to carry on in this manner with a spiritual chip on a religious chip on your shoulder, it's foul. It's foul. And it prevents you. It puts a barrier, by the way, between you and your brothers in Islam. You begin to develop feelings of animosity and hatred toward the Muslim community because you think they're all innovators and they're all sinners and they're all, it doesn't bode well. It's like water. It doesn't mix water and oil here. That the person of a pure heart loves for all the Muslims what he loves for himself. And he's humble with all of them. So you'll find that the great imams, that was their demeanor with people. They were recognized as being leaders even during their lifetime, but they were not arrogant. They were in the service of others, humble, and would engage with people, were happy to be around people. They didn't see themselves as being better than other creatures, even though they very well may be better, likely to be better. So the author here is highlighting for us, when a servant purifies in this passage both the outward and inward self, the heart becomes ready to receive he says al-fayd, which are divine outpourings. And according to Sufi thought, and this is the most basic form or understanding of this, is that fayd refers to the blessings that Allah bestows upon his beloved servants through divine openings, or what's known as fath. It deepens one's understanding of Tawheed, revealing Allah's absolute control over every benefit or harm reaching his creation. Okay, that's just a basic understanding of what this is. So what we need to know is that in order, and we're going to come back to this shortly, in order to continue to progress in your spiritual journey, at some point, you have to come to the realization that you cannot go it alone. You will not progress unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yaftah laka al-bab. Allah has to open the way for you. And in order for that to happen, this initial groundwork has to be laid. Okay, these initial things have to happen. So your heart has to be ready to accept what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can fill it with. The state is achieved when the heart is cleansed of spiritual impurities, such as vices and blameworthy traits, attachment to worldly desires, making the heart a vessel prepared to receive Allah's subtle and transformative blessings that will have an impact both outwardly as well as inwardly. He says, وَمِثْلُ هَذِهِ الْأَغْرَاضِ الْبَاطِنَةِ إِنَّمَا يَنْتَبِهُ لَهَا صَاحِبُ الْمُرَاقَبَةِ لِلْخَوَاطِرِ فكثير من العباد الصالحين يكثرون العبادات والنوافل والذكر والتلاوة ويجري في قلوبهم مثل هذه الخبائث ولا يفطنون لها فيكون مثلهم كمثل من اكتسى حللا بهية وكسوة فاخرة هي ما اكتساه من الصالح الأعمال ومع ذلك تفيح من بواطنهم روائح خبيثة منتنة فما تفي تلك الرائحة المنتنة بتلك الكسوة الطاهرة. So he says here such hidden motives, ومثل هذه الأغراض الباطنة. These hidden motives are only noticed by one who practices muraqabah over their notions. Again, now we're now turning our direction inwardly. Okay, self-discipline, worship, that has to be there, and then we begin to focus on what's happening inside. He says many devoted worshipers and righteous individuals frequently engage in acts of worship, supererogatory deeds, remembrance, and recitation, yet their hearts harbor such evils without them being aware of it. Their example is like someone adorned in splendid and luxurious garments, symbolizing their righteous deeds, while foul and repugnant odors emanate from within. The repugnant odor is not redeemed by those pure garments. And in this passage here, the author is highlighting the importance of vigilance, muraqabah, over your inner notions, and the necessity to purify the heart alongside engaging in outward acts of worship. They go together. And to understand they go together, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Inna Allah la yanzuru ila suwarikum wa amwalikum." Allah doesn't look at, or examine, I should say, your physical appearances or your wealth. وَلَكِنْ يَنظُرُ إِلَى قُلُوبِكُمْ وَأَعْمَالِكُمْ. But He examines your hearts and your deeds. Your hearts and your deeds. Not just your deeds alone. I did all these prayers and all these fasts and all these recitations, and I had a khatma every 3 days, and I did da. But what was happening inside was just a mess. But He's going to look, Allah is going to examine the heart. What was it filled with? Envy, hatred, jealousy, insincerity. Okay? So the hadith reminds us that both are important. We cannot neglect one over the other. And the concept that the author points out to serves as a reminder that external acts of devotion, no matter how numerous or beautiful, can lose their true value if the heart remains tainted by hidden impurities like arrogance, hypocrisy, and insincerity. And this concept that good deeds will not suffice with the presence of evil is found in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ when he said, "Atadruna mal muflis." Do you know who the bankrupt one is? قالوا المفلس فينا من لا درهم له ولا متاع. They said the bankrupt person among us is the one who has no money and they have no valuables. فقال إن المفلس من أمتي يأتي يوم القيامة بصلاة وصيام وزكاة. He says the bankrupt person from my ummah will come on the day of judgment. They will have prayer, they will have fasting, they will have zakat. ويأتي وقد شتم هذا. They've come and they've cursed this one. وقذف هذا. They've accused this one. وأكل مال هذا. They've wrongly consumed the wealth of this one. وسفك دم هذا. They've spilled the blood of this one. وضرب هذا. They've hit this one, abused one. فيعطى هذا من حسناته. وهذا من حسناته. This one will be given from his good deeds, and that one from his good deeds. And he goes on and he says that all of his good deeds will be spent by way of the sins that he committed. فَطُرِحَتْ عَلَيْهِ ثُمَّ طُرِحَ فِي النَّارِ. Right? Once they're gone, then the sins will be put on him, and then they will be expelled into hell. So here you can see the concept is that all of those righteous deeds, if the heart is left unchecked, untamed, riddled with disease, sinful, of a sinful nature, then those good deeds could become of very little to no value. Basically, as he describes, the foul repugnance is not redeemed by the fine garment that you're wearing. You have a beautiful outfit on, but you haven't showered for a week. You come in, you might be good to look at, but no one wants to be around you. Okay? And that's unfortunate. And sometimes people look from the outside looking in, they'll use that as a reason why they too don't want to be involved in righteous and religious practice, because they say, so many people that we see praying and fasting, they're absolute filth outside of that. They can't be trusted, they take your money, they cheat, they lie, they backbite, etc. So all those prayers, it's not doing you any good. What does you good is what's happening on the inside. And so here the Imam is warning us against focusing solely on outward acts while neglecting the required inward purification, which is the foundation, by the way. The foundation is the inward purification, that this is the fundamental focus of the seeker, and the outward acts serve as either a means to purifying the inside, or the result of a pure heart. That's what's truly going to save you. يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهِ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. As Allah says, the day when neither wealth nor children will benefit, but only one who comes to Allah with a sound heart will be saved, essentially, is what the verse means. The author then goes on and he describes what the proper balance looks like and its results. He says, وَمَتَى اكتسى العبد كسوة المحاسبة والأعمال الصالحة وراقب القلب واستعان بالله في حفظ خطراته وإقامة تقوى الله فيه وأبدل خواطر الرياء بالإخلاص وخواطر العجب برؤية منة الله تعالى وبرؤية حقارة نفسه وخواطر الكبر وحب المشيخة بالتواضع ومحبة الخمول وأن لا يفطن له وأن لا يراه ولا يعلم به أحد غير الله تعالى وخواطر الحسد بمحبته لإخوانه المسلمين ما يحبه لنفسه. So when the servant clothed himself with the garment of accountability, and this is the muhasaba, meaning the outward acts, and righteous deeds, remains vigilant over his heart and seeks Allah's help in guarding his thoughts and establishing piety or taqwa within it, he replaces thoughts of ostentation with sincerity. Notice here, now we're beginning to have an exercise. Outwardly, we worked on an exercise. Instead of eating, we're going to fast. Instead of sitting around doing nothing, we're going to pray. Instead of sitting quietly or gossiping, we're going to make dhikr. We replace the bad habits with good things. Now inside, he's showing us the replacement of these bad thoughts or these bad notions with good ones, right? Replacing thoughts of ostentation or riya with ikhlas, sincerity. Thoughts of self-admiration or ujub with recognition of Allah's favor and the awareness of his own insignificance. Thoughts of arrogance and the love of leadership with humility and a preference for obscurity, such that he does not seek to be noticed by or known by anyone except Allah, and thoughts of envy with loving for his Muslim brothers what he loves for himself. وَفِي الْجُمْلَةِ فَيَتَفَطَّنُ لِمَا يَجْرِي عَلَى الْقَلْبِ مِنْ تِجَارَةِ الرَّبِّ فَيُطَهِّرُ بَيْتَ الرَّبِّ وَهُوَ الْقَلْبِ عَنْ هَذِهِ الرَّذَائِلِ وَيُبْدِلُهَا عن مثل هذه الأخلاق ويستعمل مكارم الأخلاق ظاهرا مثل البشاشة وطيب الملاقاة ومحبة إدخال السرور على الصالحين والتواضع لهم هذا مع الذين يأنس قلبه بهم. Again, getting into some more action here. He says, in essence, he becomes mindful of what occurs in his heart as part of the Lord's divine transactions. Right? So the tijara with Allah is not just about what you're doing outwardly. That transaction, the exchange with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is not just what you're doing outwardly, but now he begins to think of managing his heart as well as a part of those divine transactions, purifying his house, which is the heart, from vices and replacing them with virtues. Outwardly, he embodies noble traits such as cheerful demeanor, warm interactions, a love of bringing joy to the righteous and humility toward them, especially those whose company brings comfort to his heart. This is how you are. You're just a joy to be around. Okay? You're just a good person to be around. Especially with those that you find comfort in. وَأَمَّا مَنْ يَخَافُ مِنْهُمْ أَنْ يُفْسِدُوا الْوَقْتِ فيستعمل معهم المداراة ويفر منهم فراره من الأسد فإن مباينة من يفسد الوقت شرط في الطريق. As for those who might waste his time or corrupt his spiritual state, he deals with them tactfully, still being good, using tact, not being rude and abrasive, tactfully, and distances himself from them as one flees from a lion. Avoiding those who disrupt one's spiritual journey is a fundamental principle of the path. Fundamental principle of the path. فَمَتَّ قَامَ بِهَذِهِ الْآدَابِ ظَاهِرًا وَبَاطِنًا وَتَأَوَّدَهَا وَأَنَّتْ نَفْسُهُ عَلَيْهَا فَحِينَئِذٍ يستعد لمواهب الحق إن شاء الله تعالى فإنه أوفى ما عليه وبقي ما يقتضيه الفضل والكرم والجود وبالله المستعان ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. He says, when he consistently upholds these etiquettes, both outwardly and inwardly, and makes them second nature, his soul or his nafs, finding tranquility in them, he then becomes ready to receive divine gifts. These are the mawahib. We'll talk about that. If Allah wills, for he has fulfilled what is required of him. What remains is for Allah's boundless grace, generosity, and kindness to complete. Allah is the one whose help is sought, and there is no power, no might except with Allah, Al-Ali, Al-Azim. So in this passage, the author emphasizes the journey of spiritual purification, of course, and divine connection through consistent muhasabah, accountability, and muraqabah. Through these practices, again, these are practices, the servant can cleanse both the inward and outward realities. The outward is being cleansed of sinful actions, and the heart is being purged of vices and impurities. And by doing so, they will receive, insha'Allah, divine gifts. Mawahib al-Haq. These are divine gifts, as the great Sunni Sufi masters have described, as spiritual blessings and insights that Allah bestows upon his devoted servants. And these gifts that Allah bestows, they're neither earned through effort alone, though effort is required. They're not earned through effort alone, though it's required, nor are they guaranteed. Rather, they're manifestations of Allah's infinite grace and generosity. They're granted to those who have purified their hearts, embodied humility, and consistently struggled seeking Allah. And you can find this in the Quran when Allah says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. As for those who struggled in our cause, جَاهَدُوا فِينَا, meaning fillah, we will surely guide them along our way. And Allah is certainly with the good doers. This is Surah Al-Ankabut. This is chapter 29, verse number 69. 29:69. Ibn Abbas, listen to this because it's quite powerful. Ibn Abbas, Ibrahim, Ibn Adham, they said, this applies to those who act upon what they know. Right? When it said, الَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا, they act upon what they know. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever acts upon what they know, Allah will grant them knowledge of what they do not know. Some scholars draw upon the verse I mentioned before, and fear Allah, and Allah will teach you, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse number 282, to emphasize the connection between taqwa and divine guidance. Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he said that what prevents us from knowing what we are ignorant of, you following me? What prevents us from knowing what we're ignorant of, meaning why we don't know these things, is our lack of action upon what we already know. If we acted upon some of what we know, it would lead to knowledge beyond what our bodies could bear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and fear Allah and Allah will teach you. Meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you this gift, will bestow upon you gifts, divine gifts of sorts, as described here. If you just act upon what it is that you know and are continuously struggling in your journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Abu Sulaiman al-Darani, he says here that jihad in the verse, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا, is not limited to fighting here, the disbelievers, this is a conventional sense, but also includes supporting the religion, refuting falsehood, suppressing oppressors. The highest form of this is enjoining good and forbidding evil. It also encompasses striving against one's lower nafs in obedience to Allah, which is the greater jihad. Okay? That's how you get to this point. وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا, as he says, those who strive in our way, لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبَلَنَا, we will guide them to our way. And what is Allah's way? The way to Jannah. And the gifts that you're given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they deepen your knowledge of Allah, strengthen your devotion, and elevate your spiritual state. They should not be taken as an end point, but a step in the journey towards divine closeness, proximity, and greater reliance on Allah. And of course, he reminds us of the importance of reliance on Allah's grace through this process to achieve these higher spiritual states, highlighting that even the most refined efforts depend entirely on His mercy and generosity. وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ الْعَلِيِّ الْعَظِيمِ. Even the best of what we can offer still requires a deep and profound level of trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The conclusion here of this section, وَيُرْتَجَى أَنْ يَفْتَحَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى لَهُ إِذَا اشْتَغَلَ بِحُكْمِ الْمُحَاسَبَةِ وَالْمُرَاقَبَةِ بِحُكْمِ النِّيَّةِ وَآدَابِهَا فَيَعْرِفُ فِي الْحَرَكَاتِ وَالسَّكَنَاتِ وَمَتَى عَرَفَ النِّيَّةَ عَرَفَ الْإِخْلَاصَ فإن النية إنما يعرفها من صار لقلبه موطن في القيام بين يدي الله تعالى فإذا أراد أن يتحرك أو يتكلم ينظر قلبه ماذا يريد بهذا العمل فإن كان لله خالصا أمضاه وإن كان لغيره أو محبطا أخلصه ونقاه. Let's hope that Allah, exalted is He, will grant him divine openings. This is another result, if you will. When he devotes, and meaning the seeker, devotes himself to the rule of accountability, muhasabah, and vigilance, muraqabah, based on the rule of niyyah. Okay, the intention here and its proper etiquette, resulting in him becoming aware of both movement and stillness. Once he comprehends niyyah, his intention, he will come to know ikhlas. For genuine intention is only fully grasped by one whose heart holds a place for the resurrection in Allah's presence, to stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, exalted be He. Thus, when he intends to act or speak, he examines his heart. What it seeks, he examines, his heart examines, you should say, he examines his heart for what the heart seeks from such a deed. Looking at what is it that I want out of this. First you have to be cognizant of what is a niyyah. What is the intention? If you don't know what an intention is, how are you going to know what sincerity is? So you have to understand the basics of niyyah, your intention here, and what sincerity of your intention looks like. And then you begin to now examine, why am I doing this? What does my heart want from such a deed? If it's purely for Allah, he proceeds with the deed. But if it's for other than Allah, or carries elements that could render it invalid, he purifies and refines it. Meaning he doesn't go, I don't think I'm doing this sincerely for Allah, so I'm not going to do it. You don't become afraid of that. That's one of the tricks and snares of shaitan. You say, well, I'm worried about my intention, so I'm not going to be involved in this khair. I don't want to be a part of this stuff because I'm worried about my intention. I might be doing it for the wrong reasons. That is very good, step number one. But step number two is, now we need to refine the intention. We need to do the work of purifying it and then getting involved, right? So that we can take advantage of the opportunities that Allah puts in front of us. So here, as we wrap it up, getting to one of the most profound points many of us are at least conceptually familiar with, and that is purifying one's intentions in every action and in every word. And this requires the process of muhasabah and muraqabah. This ensures that the heart remains connected to Allah, enabling an individual to refine their actions for His sake. Without these things, you're just out there in the wild. In a bad way, of course. Okay? With these practices, that's when you can begin to develop a pure intention. And this, of course, reflects on the prophetic teachings. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are judged by intentions. وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى, and each person will receive what they intended. This hadith is well known in Sahih Bukhari, Muslim. So the inner work here that you have to do to align the heart with the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, striving for sincerity, this is what ensures that your deeds will be accepted as they are solely done for Allah and free of any self-admiration or ostentation. There's no showing off or boasting or bragging. You're not doing it to make yourself feel good. That might be a result of your good deeds. The result of them might be, well, I feel good when I do these things. That's fine. right? But the intent behind it is, I'm doing this for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the process, I see myself as incapable or insufficient. My efforts are insufficient. And when the servant's able to achieve that, Allah will bless them with divine openings. As he says, Al-Fath. So in the Sufi tradition, Al-Fath, again, this is a very basic understanding, or openings, if you will, is the unveiling of truth to the insight of the seeker within the station of ihsan. You become aware of things. You become aware of truths that were once hidden to you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes things clear to you. And these openings, they aid the seeker to further their progress along the journey to divine proximity. Perhaps a part of that fath is that they become more aware of themselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them insight into themselves and their very nature, such that they could now rectify some of the problem areas in order to push further along in that journey towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the home of the hereafter. And that's where we will wrap it up for this evening. And with that, we conclude this section. And we'll pick up here the next time we meet. Jazakallah khair wa sallallahu wa sallam ala